Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the BlindSPOT Dissecting CTI reports to apparently make tooling and payloads. So, to explain that a little bit, in this world of red versus blue and good versus bad, and hackers versus attackers, and security professionals versus script kiddies, one of the biggest things that we've got going on these days is really a major crisis towards the blue teams, right? The defensive teams, specifically of the operations teams. These teams don't get to practice that often. These teams get, they only get to practice when ransomware hits the network. They only get to practice when there's an actual events. Tabletop exercises are great. They work. Penetration tests are great. It's rare that a red team goes, well, we're being paid so much, you guys don't want to really keep stopping us, or as an offensive team person, you go, oh man, they're getting me, and you don't want to like go too crazy and start breaking the network, and lots of little things like that that make it so there's different capabilities across the board. In this case, what we're going to be talking about here is when the blue teams do DFIR reports on either like cutting edge, greatest, latest breaking, um, just things that aren't out there in the norm. They create a report. They do some DFIR, which is disk forensics incident response. They turn around and say, hey, this is what the attack looks like. They help create IOCs. The good news is for folks like me, here at On Defend, we really take that purple teaming seriously. So we've developed tools, and we trying to put together workshops to really show how you guys, or anyone, blue teamers, red teamers, green teamers, anyone, can take some of these CTI reports and actually be able to dissect them, kind of understand what's going on. And when I say CTI reports, I want to be very clear too. We're going to be talking about a lot of the free things you can find around the internet. None of these are going to be your know befores, your big CTI vendors. This is going to be hacker level CTI. This is going to be something that, yeah, you guys as hackers, as people of the world, can say, hey, I want to access this information, and that information will be available. Some of them do require accounts to sign in, but everything I'll be showing and talking about today will be free. So, with that said, again, our entire goal is to deconstruct the CTI reports to make payloads and other things, in an effort to, again, level the playing field, walking through detections, alerting, identifying, logging, and in this case, how I read, and in this case, how on Defend and we put payloads in a blind spot read CTI reports. If you don't know me, I'm Joe Brinkley. I'm the Director of Offensive Security, Innovation, Research, and Advanced Testing here at On Defend. I now have over 16 years of professional experience. My full-time role here is kind of the mentor, director. I handle a lot of things. I've been called Master Tradecraft, Wizard, many things, but ultimately, my job roles, the core duties are penetration testing, systems security. I'm a malware author, red teaming, and security researcher, and a lot of that goes to speak to, again, the things that we here at On Defend are doing in an effort to, again, once again, level the playing field. You're going to probably hear me say that a few more times, because a lot of the efforts we go through aren't just so I can be a better offensive person. It's I want to be better offensive so we can clear out and be better defensively. All right. So first, let's talk about what cyber threat intelligence is, or CTI. Um, see, I mean, if you guys have an idea of what CTI is in the crowd, that's great. Um, but in this case, I want to chat about what CTI really is. It is many things. Cyber threat intelligence. It is the intelligence of cyber threats. Okay, we're deconstructing words now, but ultimately, the way that we here at On Defend, and I've kind of seen universally understand it, is there are threat actors. There are APTs, advanced persistent threats, ran by threat actors. Probably need to add that definition one day, threat actors, who use TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures to break into networks. And these techniques they use, these tactics, um, it used to be regarded that these things would be secretive or very hidden under the belt. But, now that there are, you know, actual folks taking a look at the way these things are done, we've reverse engineered the methodologies. We mimic them on a day-to-day basis as offensive folks. Then we work with the defensive folks and figure out how these things work, and then we employ those changes to the networks. So the advantages here is those lead to what we call IOCs. IOCs ultimately are the indicators of compromise. An indicator of compromise provides you information of an indicator of compromise. So again, dissecting words here, but this is alluding to when you get CTI, you get IOCs from APTs. There's a lot of things going on here. That's why I would be very clear. So the IOC usually ends up with uh, the capability to understand and show what is going on the network. Is this system compromised? Is this an indicator? What does that actually mean for me, to me? So the indicator of compromise specifically leads to the idea that you have been compromised, and here's the indication of it. For instance, running ransomware, running other tooling that's not being on your system, lateral movement. So all of those with our TTPs can lead to indicators of compromise. We always talk about this chart here. This is the MITRE attack. I'm sure one day I'll find a better way to display this for the team here, but in this case, the MITRE attack framework, again, this is the TTPs throughout years of experience, specifically MITRE, having been doing this since, era of even World War II. Um, there's been years of experience put into this. Um, and we can turn around and we can say we know how the attack method works. There's initial access, execution. Usually efforts are made to maintain persistence, privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access, discovery, lateral movement, collection of data, and then additional command and control. Now, in this case, we're going to be talking about Ryuk ransomware. Not the most, interesting, not the best one out there. I definitely had ideas to try to bring you guys the latest Emotet and TrickBot hybrid, but there is a lot going on with that tooling. So, unfortunately, we are not going to be talking about that one. Maybe future for sure. But for now, let's talk about Ryuk. Ryuk is a class of malware known as ransomware. This type of malware usually encrypts the user's files folders on a Windows system specifically. So what does that mean? So your user folders, your user files, the system operating system usually stays functional. You log in, and then there is a prompt that says, "Hey, pay us. Your data's gone." Now, the question is why do they do this? Well, in an effort for ransom, they want you to pay them so they can give you a key, which is why it also disables things like backups, making it on the local disk, and then it encrypts it. So it encrypts it in the same spot that it was before. So it doesn't move it. So there's no journal. They remove the NCFS journaling. They get rid of shadow copies. They do a lot of intentionally malicious things to make it very hard to recover with any form of disk forensics or incident response. Ryuk, it was originally very unique in the fact that it was a piece of malware that was human operated. Now, what does that mean? Human operated ransomware attacks. That means there's actually a operator on a C2, a backend, a control panel, however you want to view it, whatever terminology you want to use. But there is someone who has actively targeted the network. It's not just quite a point shoot and encrypt like Maze and some of the other ransomwares were in the early days, because they just had Eternal Blue or other things that they could just peruse, Shodan, get some data on a target, build a data file, build a dossier, and then encrypt the client. So in this case, now Ryuk is typically human operated. So they have identified a vulnerability, or they've identified a client, or a victim. They've identified a victim here and said, hey, I'm coming to do this to you, without telling them. They usually attempt to use forms of sophisticated tactics, and that includes stealth tactics to ensure, again, high rate of success. What does that mean? So in this case, we're going to talk about like uh, how they get onto the systems. So we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a moment. So one of the most interesting things is, when I Google for Ryuk, some of the some of the largest, highest profile Ryuk attacks were the Department of Social Services, uh, Tribune Publishing, so that's the Los Angeles Times, Chicago Times, Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. So imagine you're a very large newspaper. You no longer use, or you're a media source, media outlet. These used to be newspapers, and you actually can't print anymore because your systems that can quote print are done. Well, so you can't post on the web. So this was massive. Large payouts happen, undisclosed things. There's research I'm sure that we could do to pull up that information. Boston Committee for Public Counsel Services. So this is the public lawyers. They got hit as well. Jackson County, Georgia. They paid a $400,000 ransom. Riviera Beach, Florida. They paid a $594,000 ransom. LaPorte County, Indiana, paid a $130,000 ransom. So keep in mind, those are low. Ryuk, usually when they get hit, these were negotiation days. These were early days of Ryuk. Keep in mind, Ryuk's been around for about 3 years now, and it's still really tough to stop because it's ultimately driven by lack of capability of defensive stacks. So once it starts to encrypt, once it operates and starts to encrypt, there's not much you can do about it. Once you get to the point that it's on the system, it's laterally moving, it collects credentials, it's almost game over. A few times I've heard people stop it, put defenses in place to mitigate it, post and after, but it's very rare. Ryuk is very dangerous, which is why we're going to talk about it today. So some Ryuk research. Most common delivery method, again, so we were talking about this being user operated. Most common delivery method would be phishing. So the operator sends out spear phishing, spam phishing, any type of phishing that they can get to a inbox. The inbox gets in there, there's a document, there's an executable, there's any number of phishing and social engineering deployed, and then they go from there. And the reason we call it user control is because once it gets on the system, once there's a phone home back, the dropper gets on there, does some inherently malicious things. We'll talk about that in the TTP section, and then from there, the operation is entirely user controlled. And so there's a playbook, and the playbook again is the way that the operator runs these things, and typically it is somewhat automated these days. It's very quick, and we'll discuss that in some of our sections going forward. All right, quick switcheroony here. So all right. So here's some blind spot. I was running some campaigns just to get some fresh data on there. Looks like some of these things were completed. They're very successful. Excellent. So when I'm doing research and I'm provided a file, a DFIR report is usually where I go for a lot of these things. There are other folks again. So I wanted to talk about the CTI. So in this case, again, this CTI, Cyber Threat Intelligence, is free. DFIR report is free. You can support them. You can help them out. You can get access to some of their indicators of compromise, some of their logging tooling. other things, but the ultimate outcome is the DFI report is free. Like I said, I'm going to be looking at free sources. So we've got all these URLs at the top here. We're going to be talking about all of them. But the way I wanted to help dissect this is wanted to show you guys how I read this. So we come in, read in 5 hours. This is the older one. There are other ones before this, but I wanted to show the difference between 5 hours and 2 hours. And I'll show you how we applied them in our case to BlindSpot and some of our tooling, the way that you guys can apply them to your information. So some case summary here, stuff like that, timeline. So these things, this is where it gets really important for the timeline. If you've seen other BlindSpot demos, we have a similar timeline in BlindSpot, and we actually kind of were inspired. Well, we weren't kind of. We were inspired by the DFI report. So ultimately, there's some kind of malware executed, connects to C2, does process vulnerabilities, takes advantage of those things, breaks it down. Yeah. So you're seeing here, we get a dropper. Dropper drops part of the C2. C2 then starts to do discovery activities. Discovery activities being those things, net user, net admin, net all. Then it takes it, finds that there's a vulnerability you can take advantage of to gain access to other systems, lateral movement through over SNB, WMI, exec. So this is huge. So immediately, me as an attacker goes, oh, I do lateral movement with that too. Here's the methods I would use. So when the first time I read this, I said, okay, I don't have the exact commands they ran fully yet. I don't have everything that they fully implemented yet. But the way I would move over SMB is this way with exec, with pass the hash, things because I have zero login or I was able to dump with Mimikatz. So now I have a local user access. That's the way I do it. WMI, WMIC, I can literally, you can say, hey, create a process, do a thing on a remote system with just a username and a password. And WMIC is very powerful as long as that RPC is listening. Well, WMIC isn't on everything, but SMB is just about on everything. So when SMB exec is on there, same thing. I pass the hash, I do an exec thing, especially if I have elevated privileges. Okay, so that's how I would do it. So first time I start doing that in my head, I'm already copying, like in my head, I'm like, let me go to my shortcut command list or my copy paste list that, as a more senior level hacker, I always build those things because I don't want to always have to type the command, and I want to make sure my type responses are good. That also makes for better screenshots, having nice and clean, no misspellings, no weird capitalization, things like that. Then it deploys an additional command and control, in this case, Cobalt Strike. Reaches back out to the system, secondary Cobalt Strike beacon through DLL. So now we're pushing in. So here's the TTPs, right? We have initial access, we have persistence, we have forms of lateral movement. We're dumping information. We're creating C2 channels. We're creating a persistence ultimately with 2 beacons, one probably with a low jitter that if it gets nicked, the beacon with the DLL has a longer jitter, so it doesn't get nicked nearly as quick. And then discovery continues on domain controller. So now this is where it's going to be running things like, oh, well, what would I do if I want to discover a domain controller? First thing I do when I get on a Windows network, DNS lookup. Okay, is that the domain controller? You query it, you see if it's got open ports, you use AD find, some of the AD view tools. Oh, okay, so there's a domain controller at that IP address. Now what do I got to do? I got to see if I can use this user that I have to log in. Oh, again, at this point, this is still some of the manual stuff going on. So now that there's a C2 beacon on there, this is where the, user operated comes in. The user starts to attempt additional lateral movement with secondary domain controllers, RDP. This is active now. This is where an attacker is actively typically doing these things. Try to break onto the primary domain controller, using like AD sync, any number of other things. You've got credentials. Hopefully by then, boom, Cobalt Strike on there. You own the domain controller. AD find, run for primary domain controller, find anything else running. All right. Threat actor continues. Okay. So again, as I'm digesting this, I'm dissecting it. I'm going, okay, these are things they're making moves, and each one of these can be attributed to a set of commands and things happening in the background. All right. This is how I do it. And then Ryuk is Ryuk executable. So now we're taking the actual file, literally clicking and dragging over the IDP connections, and then double clicking and now executing. Keep in mind that this isn't sophisticated shell coding at the moment. This is literally an executable that says, I'm going to do malicious stuff. I'm going to encrypt. I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to touch insert where my beacons are. I'm only going to do user folders and program files and like maybe like really critical folders. There are some things that don't get encrypted by Ryuk. It's not a world ender, but that it's definitely going to cause you a lot of issues. It's looking for docs, things like that. Okay, so Ryuk is ran, and then it starts, and then is ran on the last system. And what does that last system mean? That's as it laterally moves, your beacons are on each one of the systems. It's then dragged over RDP or SMB. It's executed on every system. Ransomware. Now you have your ransom note. You see how many systems you got, and then you say, "Hey, I want $1 million." Whatever the case may be. All right. So again, this is DFI report, so it's free. So they're going to help break down initial access, execution, privilege escalation. Like I said, so okay, we're using zero login. We're looking for services. Again, this is the forensic level information. We're doing these passwords. We're using the RPC net login. Okay. So now here's where again I started talking about, how would I execute this thing? How would I do this thing? So now it's literally at this point, this is where the uh, uh, Cobalt Strike and other things start getting spread around the network. So we have those domain controllers because that's the first thing you want to target. You want to get the domain because once you get the domain controller, you dump credentials, you have the ability to laterally move, and that's usually where the money is, right? So that's you use credentials from there, you beacon out to everything, you already transfer RDP or SMB. It's the spray and pray. You just literally start from left, the most left machine or the most right machine, just pan from the whole horizon. Boom, 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 boom. And the way that it can be done is literally this command right here, cmd execute c echo with a file name pipe, and then it does these things. So now this is literally the Cobalt Strike name beacon pipe escalation. So now we're escalating privileges. We've got login already. We've done all these things. This is to spread it. This is to keep it live. This is to create backdoors. So what do we do now? Defense evasion. Well, why do we need defense evasion? Well, let's be honest. Cobalt Strike, one of the most well-known C2s, probably has one of the most signatured C2s. So then it tries to do, this is the DLL section that we talked about up there. It runs DLL. Okay, so to me now, if I'm going to be doing this, the first thing I want to do, well, maybe I don't want to deploy Cobalt Strike because then I'm going to be burning Cobalt Strike payloads. Let me just do this. All right. So you do these things, kind of these things. And so, DLL. Okay, I can totally run shellcode from a DLL. So I say, first things first, I'm going to literally run command prompt, run DLL32, sys Windows DLL, and then I'm going to start putting in malicious things. I'm going to start running malicious commands. I see a lot of um, malware use this perflogs, run DLL perflogs. They put the DLL in there, and then it runs it. Okay, now we've got a shell. We've got shellcode running through a DLL. Okay, dangerous. And by the way, you can copy all of these commands. You can put them in a Python script, a batch file. So now you're emulating the exact things they're doing. Of course, try not to use Ryuk or, things like that, but you can write your own commands that pop up. And I'll show you here in a moment some of the things that you can do. Just pop a calculator. You can pop up a Word document, a notepad that says certain things. You can echo things in and out. And then we're going to do, this is where it does the additional discovery. It's looking for who's the domain admin. Is there a domain admin on the server? Because that's the person I want to target. Because again, domain admin has access to every machine. Once you get domain admin, net groups, enterprise admin, your domain admins, transferring all trust. So now we're copying the domain controller, we're breaking things out. So again, I'm using free CTI to develop this payload. So what some of these things will start to look like. It's really interesting. So, and again, so here's additional things that are happening. Ran on the beachhead. So these are things again. I want to say, hey, domain trust. What are your trust? Again, we're gathering recon since this is human operated. Um, with the human operation, they're gathering some of this info. They're putting in their notepad or cherry tree or whatever they're using. Um, so boom, 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 boom. And now we're literally getting into things like, oh, this is Intel ran on the domain controller. Boom, boom, boom. So you can script all this out, creating VBS scripts, batch scripts, any number of things that would allow you to emulate these. Then additional things start to run. So again, 80 find. I'll show you guys this here in a few moments. Starts to break this down. So again, this literally has all this information here. So as I'm dissecting this, I'm thinking I would do these same things, or maybe differently. Because the point of detecting them in this case, writing the IOCs is yes, you probably want to trigger on any of these directly, especially with these IOCs, indicators of compromise. A lot of these things being ran in a row, 80 find will usually set off antivirus unless it's been disabled or um, it's being ran in certain ways. So once you get that, like, yeah, that's something you should investigate immediately. If somebody's running 80 find on a system, investigate, indicator of compromise. Lateral movement, you'll see here, like they tried to do some file creation with the WMIC. Um, File created, file name, process, and then it completed. Okay, and then the command prompt, so more WMIC, node, and so this is node, and so this is saying domain controller, and then now it's calling the create process, and then literally creating that services.execute. So it's creating the file. So now, again, this is the lateral movement, persistence, and capabilities like that. So once it's done all this, you can literally, again, you can copy these commands and run them straight into a demo box, your not your production Active Directory, please. You can run some of these things, and you can start to see how these would start to set up things. In this case, they would change GPOs, try to add it so they can get additional information. The entire goal is to get as many machines C2'd, backdoored, laterally moved, access to, and then running reuk.execute. Um, so when you go through and try to clean these things and you're fighting them, you're just trying to clean up reuk. Meanwhile, they've got it C2'd, and so, oh, I've cleaned it from many systems, but they still have C2 access. They can then once again use those credentials, scan the network, maintaining access, re-encrypting, and then charging potentially more. So the reason we started here is this was the 4.5 hours. This is the reuk to execution 5 hours. This is fantastic here. So this actually shows the execution. So it creates perf logs, creates the reuk executable, opens up, runs the things, runs some things, lateral movement, um, boom, adds these things to, starts to break into these systems, everyone access, boom, boom, boom. Indicators of compromise. This is where I was talking about. So even from my perspective as offensive security, I use indicators of compromise to essentially mock up what they've got. So I usually don't, unfortunately, use the DNS domains. I usually try to create my own using like really funny domains, really suspicious link dot link, really, this is, not reuk.com, things like that. I unfortunately, I'm not going to be using the same files they have, but the detections, right? So now the places you can start to detect some of these things is one of the things we try to help the blue teams do is say um, stop using the heuristics, stop using the signature, start trying to again detect the behavior. The heuristics and procedures and executables and files and locations are fantastic indicators of compromise. But so tomorrow they re-roll all of their executables, they re-change all of their IP addresses, they buy servers in an entirely different country and do it again, you get got again. Um, So that's why I'm saying, hey, you got to look out for 80 find. You got to look out for these bigger indicators, and we'll talk about some of those things. So then, of course, this provides you all these beautiful Sigma and Yara rules, and then I'll read through these and say, okay, what are they doing? How are they doing it? And here's where the cool thing comes in. MITRE ATT&CK framework, they can break it down. So I can tell you, and I'll show you here in a few moments how we do it here at On Defend. Once we get through a few more of these, but yeah, here spearfishing. Like, well, we don't spearfish all the time. Usually, we try to do assume breach, but we have done phishing when users click on the links, when users click on the executables, when users download those macros, and that macro, yeah, sure, it might just reach out to a tracking pixel on a website and say, from this IP address with this username and this who am I, or whatever the case may be. If we put a little executable on there that just does a little things, or calls like, oh, who's the user of the web browser? What's the web browser? So we collect a little bit of information. Again, it's all I've been told. Oh, that's all like suspect. That's not great intel, but it just shows that I'm able to collect that additional piece of intel. Remote desktop protocols. If you're seeing people use zero login, net login, routing around the network, you should see some of those things. You should see a lot of SMB traffic. Again, those are indicators if you start monitoring for that, for those IOCs, remote file copies. So these are all fantastic TTPs. I can dive into each one of these forever. All right. So the next thing I wanted to kind of piece of intel that I usually use is, of course, AnyRun. If you never used AnyRun, I use this all the time for intel. You can literally watch the video of the malware being executed. You can see all the registries things popping up, doing things. Fast forward, boom. You've been popped. So AnyRun is fantastic. So how do I use this? Once again, by the way, Ryuk seems to still be very active, very much around. Um, Talk about, they'll break down their description. What is Ryuk? Da, 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 da. Well, all really good information. But again, as a offensive person trying to write these things, I'm also looking at these things, the text documents. So it's Ryuk readme.txt. So I can say, hey, why don't you set an alert indicator for that if that file gets made or copied there, because that usually gets transferred at some point, or written through an echo. Look through your sysmon, a lot of these things. So scroll through, we got all of these more and more information um, that we can run through. Uh, just again, collecting a little bit more to try to emulate the CTI for the purpose of writing payloads and tooling. All right. So this one. So this is Ryuk speedrun, 2 hours to ransom. So they've at this point, the other one was from October 2020. Yes, again, they're older. They're still very dangerous. We scroll very much back to the top. October, November. So within a short period of time, they evolved. They changed some of their IOCs. They changed some of their methodologies. But let's break it down really fast. So speedrun. Malware dropped, executed, dropper, discovery immediately, Cobalt Strike executed, 80 find. Remember that other time before, DLLs, other things. Now we're running 80 find immediately, executed, alpha files, exfiltrated. So again, I've got all the 80 find information. I'm pulling that data back to through my C2 channel. Bam, already done with recon. At this point, this was if executed at 2057. I now have discovery activity done in 3 minutes. Cobalt Strike first executed in 10 minutes. And at 10, so 11, 12 minutes, I'm already running 80 find instead of before where there was a couple steps. The timeline was a little bit longer. Now, after that, then I'm finding the zero logon of vulnerability, trying to exploit that against the primary domain controller. From there, and like keep in mind that's much quicker. Now I've gone from dropped 80 fine. Who's your domain controller and what does he do? Turn around, bam, already targeting it with at this time zero login vulnerability. Bam, in dumping creds, lateral movement from domain controller, running as the system or as domain administrator, whatever I was able to get to RDP, command and control, boom, a command and control established on domain controllers. Now we had our foothold system, the beach. We have the domain controller C2'd already, lateral movement from the domain controller using SMB. So now we're opening up SMB. We've put the Ryuk.executable on there somewhere. We're disabling antivirus. We're dropping additional defense or blinding AMSI, saying don't look at these things. And then that's within 1 hour. So 2207 from 20,057 to 2107 to now 2207. So hour and what is that, 3 minutes? Am I doing math wrong? And then immediately lateral movement to backup servers. Again, this is where they started targeting, like, oh, I'm going to look for the words Veeam, Windows, backup. I'm going to find those, RDP to the systems using the beachhead. So that's our initial point. We've got user heads, start spraying and praying, accessing those systems. And then immediately, instead of waiting till the end, deploying ransomware, executing, and then getting 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're compromising, rooting, laterally moving, ransom. By time I'm moving to the next system, I'm putting the ransomware on there, executing, moving to the second system. So now it's a multiple avenues. We've multitasked ransomware with the Ryuk. And then short period of time later, within the quote 2-hour window, all systems ransom. So with that, instead of focusing on one, if that 1 plus 1 plus 1, no, now we're doing 1 times multiple numbers and moving through them in bulk at the same time. Again, very similar stages, but you'll see here that they actually immediately start within the services.execute. They start pulling in other things. So I now can copy and paste these, write all these things, creating scheduled tasks, immediately doing bad stuff, pulling, deleting. What is this doing? Creating. Oh, okay. So it's creating. This is where it's creating the actual some of the executables, pulling them in, running them. So now I've scheduled them. I've automated. I've used Windows inside things to automate it. That's why it was so much faster. Privilege escalation, using the net login, dumping AD, RPC logins to the systems with WMIC or SMB, spraying, praying, and landing things. The defense evasion starts to come in with all these things. So now I'm using SVC host instead of run DLL. Many of those things. Code signing wasn't introduced. Again, within that short period of time, the playbook has changed. Now, instead of using some of the other net discover that we were running before, now we're using kind of the standard issue discovery that I see a lot of the time. This is almost in every piece of malware. This is on every payload we run. I've not seen something not really use these. It's infrequent. NetView, all domain. So immediately we're doing these. So again, these are IOCs right here. All of our payloads for BlindSPOT do this. All of our payloads written in Go do this. All of our handcrafted work do this. As soon as I get on a machine as a pen tester, I usually don't do this anymore, but these are things that definitely used to get ran. Now, again, here's the way AD Find looks from the both the domain and the beachhead. Immediately runs, does these things, collects the data, exfiltrates this data. So again, since this is mostly user operated, the attacker has these things. Import module, Active Directory, lateral movement. So again, I can copy and paste all these things. I'm dissecting these free reports. All right. I don't see any questions yet. We are at the 41-minute mark. If there's any questions so far, let me know. All right. So this is a newer tool ran into, analyzed by Intezar. I was looking through, genetic analysis. They tell you, oh yes, this is the people upload file samples. This is Ryuk. So what you just go here, Google Ryuk. They give me some SHA hashes, again, for regular detection with um, static detection and rules. Um, Ryuk, this is what it looks like. Here's the things it's doing. Okay, cool. The you start to build in. So then I was like, oh, they have TTPs. Oh, well, not many TTPs for this version. They have IOCs. Okay, cool. So now we have some file IOCs. Again, one of the things I would keep talking about is how do I detect the behaviors? So now they have some screenshots. So then they see, in this case, they don't have any network activity for these. So then I was like, oh, is there another version of Ryuk? I kept looking and I started finding, yes, now they have the IOC or the TTPs. They don't have the MITRE ATT&CK numbers here built fully out yet. It is a manual process, it seems. Um, Creates the memory, retrieves HTTP request. Okay, so again, looking at IOCs. Okay, more IPs, file information. Again, we can go to behavior. We can see more of this malicious activity. So digesting these, even though there's not much data here, sometimes there can be a lot of data here. Again, you using Intezar, you can jump around and look for multiple areas. All right. As we're winding down and getting closer and closer to the blind spot tab, I can't talk about Ryuk and simulations without talking about my dear friends over at Scythe. We use them to create many of our payloads, to create a lot of our tradecraft and malware. So Scythe had, when we were building our Ryuk, they had built a payload in Scythe already, and it was a community threat. They do a lot of stuff here. Ryuk, they talk about their big shout out again, the DFIR report. So even Scythe, who makes payloads, who develops tooling to frameworks to make these things in the background, run them on systems, and then test, hardcore like hands-on purple team test. Um, it's telling you what's going on. So they tell you download the template, grab the virtual file system, the VFS, put it in the threat catalog. So they tell you how to implement. So let's take a peek. So we've talked about how this works. Well, first of all, we always saw like, oh, they were running 85 and some power and some other tools. Oh, PowerView PS1. So instead of downloading that from GitHub or what some other things, like, yes, you can write it in your script to download the latest version. You can arbitrary, or again, do what the bad guys are doing, and you can have it sitting in your C2, doing a get through that instead of like arbitrarily reaching out to locations. Like, because I'll tell you now, I have some clients who just block GitHub, period. Sucks for their developers, sucks for those things. GitHub, Pastebin. Why? Because they know malware can be retrieved from there. Well, if I'm pulling it through my VFS over my C2, there's nothing you do. The Ryuk README, I told you, this is almost the indicator of compromise, right? Hey, do these things. Pay me. And these are literally the things that happen. Um, so it runs PowerView, Ryuk, so the 85.bat, literally running all those things we saw in the DFIR report, word for word. And then the task kill, this goes through and stops SAMs, Veeam. So again, the backup. I mentioned that, so it's also, again, Ryuk, for the 2-hour version kind of looks for those things. It's going to find, did you have these things running? Veeam, did you have SAMs? Did you have these things? I'm going to go target them. Starts killing SQL browser, starts killing more Veeam. Windows backups get killed. Task Manager kills the shadow encoding. Windows tooling it grants and then again grants that level of access we saw. So when building out this campaign, you can come here, you can download these things, put them on your system, and run it just like the Ryuk ransomware gang. Let's see. So Scythe does a fantastic job. So they talk about the attack navigator. So this is the JSON threat. So this is if you're importing it into Scythe. Ryuk ransomware threat does some things, but again, just quickly dissecting this, you start to go, okay. So it's making a directory called at my user profile desktop Ryuk. Okay, so I can write that in a batch file. Literally, you can copy and paste this right here. This is free intel. As you dissect it, again, copy and paste this right here. Again, we're emulating the TTP here. They're not actually deploying Ryuk. So then again, it pulls down from your VFS, do these things. So you can write this any number of ways. You can say from this SMB location with these user creds. You can put SMB on the cloud. You can move this over via your C2. The next step after that, we're going to create some tasks, and these tasks are going to just pop calculator.execute at 11 o'clock. So certain times. So now, again, we're not trying to execute Ryuk. We just want to show that here's these things. These are the TTPs you should be detecting. You should be seeing people creating scheduled tasks. Why? Because now every day at 11 o'clock, you're going to get annoyed by this popping up. Scrolling. Again, each one of the CMD task lists. So now it's going to go, okay, it's going to look for those things. That's going to add to those tags that it was actually able to run that. So now we have these TTP. So Scythe actually runs these to the TTP. If that is able to execute, these are your MITRE attack. From atomic to attack tactic, and then the actual technique. So they tag all of the stuff. Fantastic. So now you can literally compare that to the MITRE attack framework. Scrolling through just real quick. All these things. And then you go back here, and then remember I told you that attack navigator JSON. Well, if you have the attack navigator application loaded up, you can just copy and paste this right in there, and it'll show you this exact path. I unfortunately don't have it set up. Go from there. More CTI available from Virus Total, looking at IOCs, looking at what Ryuk does, the detections, how more IOCs, actual memory. Again, breaks it down. Great. Comments on Ryuk. All right. Now to our what's near and dear to me, blind spot. So I have, as per usual, my system. Nope. Oh, it went to sleepy. Sorry, as that wakes up. Or could just do it quickly. That's great. All right. Whew. As you see here, we have a calculator. We have tools popping up. I have AD find running. I have batch files that were failing to run because I probably screwed up somewhere. So again, this was all ran from BlindSpot. So I ran these campaigns right here. I will show you simulation library. So as Ryuk evolved, so did our campaigns. You'll see what we have, like AWL bypass, we have Ryuk ransomware, and then we kind of V1.1. So that's our more modern version of it. Let's see. Let's click these. Off on the right here, we map them to the TTPs, what's going on, command and control, scripting. So we're running all these TTPs again, helping to encourage the blue teamers and even ourselves, purple teamers, and everyone else to try and use the detections from TTPs. Things like that. What's going on? What's this? What's that? Oh, well, if it's detecting the TTP, we can go from there. So back under here, Ryuk. Oh, I went to the wrong spot, didn't I? Okay. So here, as we built these out, we now have binary executables, application whitelisting. So that, again, loading our executable via DLL, process injection into multiple processes. And again, you can see all the fun TTPs and what's going on over here. We can click these. navigate to the attack navigator. It'll say schedule task. Again, breaking down the TTPs, ways you can detect IOCs, additional links, ways to detect signal ruling. We're building all that up. It's getting to be awesome. Campaign. So here's a standard binary. Again, we can show that we definitely had access to the system because we have the name, the task completed. So now come over here, click here. Now let's see what happened. We had 18 actions blocked. Awesome. So my AV was on. So it actually blocked a lot of these actions, running the command, creating desktop reuk, things that it didn't detect, creating that scheduled task to pop the calculator. So that would be successful in potentially creating a scheduled task to run reuk or any of these other commands later. The cool thing here is we can definitely see that were these things successful? Click. No. Incorrect function. Can I click here and see that these things were successful? Yes. Success. Scheduled task was created. So literally, Ryuk, so we broke down what we saw and all that free intel, all the DFI reports, the sites, the ANI runs, and we made this list of TTPs here. Things that we were able to run, things we weren't able to run. Again, anything blocked, BlindSpot knows by default was blocked because it was unable to run. Again, I can go click, I can retrieve evidence, incorrect function. So we've got all that. So go back, Ryuk. So let's see, that was the regular binary, right? So that was the binary. Let's look at the process injection one. All right. Now only 11 were blocked. We're 39. So I process injected and said, do these bad things. Now we know, hey, these things could be very successful. As we saw many things popped up. AD find wasn't working. Command task list. We ran task list. We have process IDs. Again, our goal is to emulate the TTP to the point that you can start to write detections. How do I know that this was bad? I shouldn't. If this is ran in conjunction with any of those other things, then those are the things that should happen. Mitigations, we're still writing some of these up, but possible detections, again, looking for command line scripting, creating scheduled tasks. Should you be alerting on every time that happens? No, but in your sim, you need to be building in a tolerance that if 2 or 3 or 4 of these commands are ran in a row, that maybe you get an alert. It definitely should all be logged. Um, I think a lot of us can agree on that. I know that's tough to say. Some organizations don't have budgets for that level of logging. So from our blind spot perspective, we have blocked, we have alerted, which means it came to the sim. We have logged, which means it just went to a logging server or no evidence. Because if you're able to look up in Windows Event Viewer or your logging system, whatever you're using, Windows Event Forward to a elk to some kind of log stash or just a giant storage space. If those logs are then being parsed, at least you can then do some forensics. And then that's again where you start to take your tools and write the detection, not for the static code, but specifically for the capabilities here. All right, I'm going to enter the questions phase since we've got a few moments left. Anyone watching have any questions while I wrap this up? Again, some of the cool things that we look at, all these TTPs, how many were blocked under that TTP, how many were not logged. So we're able to really tell you what happened with your tooling here. And that's the features of BlindSpot. But you can take all of these commands here that we write right here from Scythe, from DFI report, and run them. You can and then test for these things. And it's important to break down the CTI and the threat intel and the understanding and build these things because that's how we get the detections. That's how we get better. That's how your red team can do it for you. Your blue team, if you have someone savvy with scripting and automation, write these things. You don't want to write them. OnDefend is here to help. with BlindSpot using our free CTI. We do have multiple other paid vendors. We have other forms of CTI, but I wanted to bring something to the community, to you guys, that without having too much of an issue, without having to pay for anything. It's a free login. All of these were free. NSR was the only one that made me like log in. Totally fine. It's, they want to see what I'm doing. That's fine. DFIR report free. Literally just navigated to this page. Google Ryuk. If you're worried about Emotet, Emotet is back. It's a big Emotet is now merged with a TrickBot, so it has droppers now. It has modules. It has its own C2 level frameworks. It's going to be doing a lot of crazy things. I was going to try to bring that to you guys, but the new Emotet is so crazy, so cutting edge. It was crazy. Oh, thanks, James. Well, I'm glad you caught the last 20 minutes. If there's any questions, I'm glad, again, this will be, it is recorded and will be available for review. Again, if you guys have any questions, again, we're talking about BlindSpot, doing all these things. Here's our lovely spaghetti thing. So as our TTPs, as you can see on the left side, get filtered through. We try to help people start detect them more, because a lot of, we find that red area, that no evidence, becomes a big issue. And the system console and Splunk, you don't get alerts, only if some things are logged. Running through several of these with us, or just running through these yourself. I mean, you don't get a beautiful spaghetti string dashboard, but then, again, you can see, oh, these things are now being logged by Carbon Black. We know where these things are going. We're detecting more. We're putting Splunk. We're alerting more. We're logging. But the ultimate goal is to also have your tools block more, so that way your SOC doesn't get alerted. If these things are clearly inherently malicious, I tell you now, sure, alert your SOC, but literally alert them to say it was blocked. Can always feel free to contact us. These slides will be available at github.com/ondefend/webinars. I appreciate you guys joining me today. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we're available at info@ondefend. I don't see any additional questions, but I really appreciate the webinar, guys. You guys are very welcome. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it, Ali. James, thank you so much. Everybody else for showing up. This will be recorded and available, so look forward to that.